The wind howled over the Badlands like something banished from heaven, lashing grit across the high plains in waves that scraped the skin raw. Clay Harlow kept his head down, one hand on the brim of his battered hat, the other guiding his mare through the dried-out gulch that sliced his land into uneven, useless parcels. This had once been Shawnee grazing land, now it was nothing but wind and regret. He'd carved a home into it anyway. Home. A word that still tasted foreign. Clay hadn't spoken much in the 3 years since his wife died, nor had he eaten proper or slept through a single night without waking to that low scream trapped behind his teeth. The drought had stolen the corn, the blight took the cattle, the bank took the rest. All he had left was this patch of dust and a name that meant nothing outside of a letterhead. He wasn't looking for anyone when he found her. At first he thought it was a coyote sprawled at the edge of his north field, just another carcass heat-cooked to stillness. But something about the shape made him stop. She was curled in on herself like a child, bones prominent through her travel dress, shoes worn to the sole. Her hair was caked in dirt, but the red of it caught the sun when he stepped close. She wasn't dead yet. He crouched beside her, touched her wrist, weak pulse. Her skin was baked and flaking, lips bloodied from the wind. He lifted her head gently and poured the last of his canteen against her mouth. She swallowed like an animal, eyes fluttering open just long enough to catch him in them, green eyes, cracked with red at the corners. "Male," she rasped. He bent lower, "Say again." She pushed a folded piece of paper against his chest. Her fingers trembled. It was a letter, a name on it, Clay Harlow. It had been addressed in a shaky script, postmarked from Boston. He opened it with slow, grim hands. To Mr. Harlow. She was a mail-order bride, sent west with nothing but a promise and a photograph that must have lied. Clay read the letter twice, then looked at her again. "You're too late," he said, but not to her, to whoever thought this kind of thing still worked out here. Still, he lifted her into his arms and took her home. The house was a box with a tin roof and slanted walls, but the wood stove still worked and the bed was dry. He laid her down and covered her with the wool blanket he used in winter, then sat beside her and waited. She shivered, coughed, muttered words he couldn't understand. By morning she was worse. By noon she was dying. She had no name on the letter, just your bride. No last name, no history. When he asked her what to call her, she blinked slowly, the heat rising under her skin like fire. He didn't press again. The preacher was out in Cody. A 6-hour ride, one way. Clay didn't saddle up. He married her anyway. He found his father's Bible beneath the floorboard and read the words over her as the wind shrieked around the cabin walls. She didn't speak, didn't move, but he held her hand and said her vows for her. It was the first time he'd said anything in weeks. When it was done, he kissed her brow and whispered, "You're home now." She slept 3 days. When she woke, she wasn't the same woman, not just from the sickness, but from something else buried deeper, something that had been watching him from behind her cracked-lipped silence. She didn't ask why he'd married her. She didn't thank him. She sat up slow, drank water from his cup, and when she could walk again, she moved like someone who'd never been allowed to before. On the 5th day, she spoke her name. Elia. Just that, no family, no past. Clay didn't press. She helped him fix the porch, though her hands shook. She mended his torn shirts without asking. She moved through the house like she'd been there all her life, and something in Clay, a place he'd thought long since buried, began to shift. He wanted to save her, but he didn't know then what she'd come west to bury. The summer wore on like a wound that wouldn't close. Clay worked the land by muscle memory, dragging the plow through parched earth too stubborn to yield. No rain came, no letters either, just the endless thrum of heat and silence, broken only by the buzz of flies and the creak of floorboards shifting at night. Elia didn't ask questions about the ranch or what it used to be. She didn't need to. She could read the story in the way Clay walked, shoulders hunched from failure, hands calloused from holding on too long. She stayed quiet, moving around the edges of his life like someone born in shadow. But every few days she took the rifle out and cleaned it on the front steps. "You shoot?" Clay asked once, more out of habit than real curiosity. Her hands never paused. "I used to." He left it there. But he watched her more after that. By the second week, she'd carved a place for herself in his home without asking. She fixed the door hinges that had squealed for years. She cooked without flour, stretched dried beans into something that almost tasted like stew. She even dug out the root cellar he'd abandoned last winter when the frost came too early. He tried to say thank you once, but the words caught like dry twine in his throat. One morning she woke before him, left a pot of chicory on the stove and vanished. No note, no sound. He found her 2 miles out, standing by the old stone well that hadn't held water since the war ended. Her boots were caked in red clay, her eyes fixed on something far beyond the hills. "You lose something out here?" he asked. "No," she said, her voice distant. "Found it." She wouldn't say more, but he caught the edge of something sharp in her tone, like steel glinting beneath fabric. That night, she sat on the porch and sewed something into the lining of her dress. He didn't ask what. Weeks passed. He began to dream again. Fragments of his old life. His first wife's laugh echoing down the hallway, the feel of warm bread in the kitchen before dawn. A girl's voice saying Papa, though he'd never had a daughter. He'd wake with the taste of ash in his mouth, and Elia would be already up, watching the sky like it owed her a debt. Then came the boy. It was just past dusk. Clay heard the hooves before he saw the dust, rising like smoke over the far ridge. A single rider, small and hunched. He stepped onto the porch with the shotgun leveled low, but not drawn. Elia stood beside him, her posture shifting. Not tense, ready, the horse was lame. The boy, no older than 12, slid from the saddle and staggered forward, sunburned and shaking. He wore Eastern clothes too fine for travel, the sleeves torn at the seams. "Elia," he croaked, then dropped to his knees. She didn't move. "Who is he?" Clay asked. She stepped down and knelt beside the boy. He clung to her like a child waking from nightmare. "My brother," she said. Clay stared, cold creeping up his spine. "You said you came alone." "I did." The boy's name was Sam. He'd been sent west 2 months behind her with a different escort. He had a different letter and a different name on his documents. Elia had told him where to meet her. "If anything happens, find the canyon with the crooked tree." But the man she'd traveled with hadn't made it that far. Sam wouldn't say how or why, just that he'd run, that they'd been hunting him. Clay listened in silence. Elia's hand never left the boy's back. When the story ended, Clay nodded once and walked into the barn. When he came back, he handed Sam a blanket and a hunting knife. "You sleep inside. That door stays locked when it's dark." The boy nodded. They didn't speak of it again, but the rhythm of the house changed. Elia kept the rifle closer now. Sam slept with one eye open. Clay found fresh boot prints near the outer fence and covered them with brush. He began carrying his revolver again, even when he was just out tending the fence posts. The land was dry, but not dead. Something was coming, and all three of them could feel it in their bones. Something Elia had dragged with her across 2,000 miles and a lifetime of silence. Clay had married a dying woman, but what he got was something else entirely. They came on a Thursday, not riders in daylight like Clay expected, but 2 men on foot, ghost quiet in the half-dark before dawn. Clay saw the first shape near the tool shed, a shadow where none should have been. The second tried the front door. He didn't knock. Clay had the shotgun in hand before the floorboards stopped creaking. Elia was already by the back window, her rifle raised. She didn't flinch when the glass shattered beside her head. The first shot came from outside, a warning or maybe not. Sam was under the bed, knife gripped in white knuckles. Clay motioned once, "Don't move," and stepped out onto the porch. He fired before he saw the man's face. The buckshot tore through the shoulder, spun the figure sideways into the dirt. He didn't cry out, just grunted, rolled, and tried to crawl behind the woodpile. Clay put another round into the air just above his head. "You try that door again," Clay shouted, voice like gravel and storm, "and you won't get up next time." The second man ran. Elia tracked him through the scope and lowered her gun. "Why didn't you take the shot?" Clay asked. "He's not the one I'm looking for." That was the first time she admitted she was looking for someone. They tied the wounded man to the kitchen table leg. He bled onto the floor in slow trickles, eyes half closed but not unconscious. Sam hovered in the corner with a jug of water and a coil of rope, silent and pale. Clay cleaned the wound roughly. "You'll live." The man didn't answer, didn't ask to be spared. He just watched Elia. She stood over him, arms crossed. "Where is he?" No name, no need. The man's lip curled. "Dead maybe, gone more likely. He don't leave tracks when he don't want to." "He sent you." "He spat blood. He owns us." Elia knelt, reached for something inside her bodice. A piece of folded canvas. She unwrapped it with care, a flat rectangle of ivory, fine carved with a symbol Clay didn't recognize. She held it up to the man's face. "Does he still wear this?" The man's eyes flickered. "I'll take that as a yes," she said, and drove a knife into his thigh. Clay didn't stop her. Later, when the sun was high and the stink of sweat had settled deep into the walls, the man broke, not with screams but a slow, crumbling confession. "Elia Durant," he whispered. "He's still looking. He never stops." She didn't react, just stood, washed the blood from her hands in a tin basin, and said nothing else. They let the man go at sunset, stripped of his boots and guns. Sent him crawling back east across the cracked earth. Sam asked why they didn't kill him. Elia answered without turning, "He's not the one that matters." Clay watched the horizon long after the man was gone. His land had always been empty. Now it was a stage. That night he sat outside with the revolver across his lap and a cup of cold coffee in hand. Elia joined him after the boy slept. She sat close but didn't touch him. She smelled of wood smoke and vinegar, blood and dust. "You gonna tell me now?" he asked. She didn't pretend not to know what he meant. "When I was 14, she began, "he came through our town with a wagon and a preacher's coat. Said he was doing the Lord's work, bought land, bought silence. My father gave him both. Then he started taking girls." Clay didn't speak. "I was the fourth. Sam was too young then. Our mother begged him to run when the fire came. She died screaming." Her voice was quiet, even, like she'd recited this story in her head 1,000 times but never aloud. "I escaped," she said, 3 years later, left others behind. I've been tracking him ever since." Clay didn't ask what she meant by escaped. He didn't want to know. Some stories lived better in silence. "Why marry me?" he asked after a long stretch of wind and creaking boards. "You were a name on a list, a place I could vanish into." "And now?" She turned to look at him. Her eyes weren't soft, they never had been. "Now I've got a place to fight from." The next morning, Clay rode into town for supplies and came back with 3 boxes of shells and a coil of barbed wire. Elia dug trenches near the edge of the field and taught Sam how to reload a rifle without flinching. They were building a siege line, not a home. It suited them. Autumn slipped in like a knife between ribs, quiet, sudden, final. The wind shifted, not softer but colder, and the dust turned gray as old bone. Clay knew what it meant. A hard winter was coming. He could smell it in the bark, in the brittle taste of creek water, in the way the birds flew low and fast. The house changed, too. Barrels of salted meat lined the pantry. The windows had been cross-braced and shuttered. Clay rigged a bell wire across the northern fence. Elia set traps around the back trail that led down to the dry wash. Sam stopped asking if it was over. He knew better now. It was never over, not for people like them. Most nights, Clay lay awake listening, boots on the porch, the scrape of wind on tin, Elia's breath slow and measured in the dark. She never spoke in her sleep. She never cried, either. Whatever had broken in her back east, it hadn't left cracks, only edges. One morning she brought a name to the table, Gideon Voss. She said it like a verdict. Clay looked up from his tin plate. Sam froze, spoon halfway to his mouth. That your preacher? He's no preacher, just knows how to wear the skin of one. Elia unfolded a piece of paper, parchment yellowed at the corners, scrawled in a hand too neat to be honest. It was a ledger, not of money, but names, girls, towns, ages. She, stolen it from a rail office outside Kansas City 3 years ago. Clay didn't ask how. He calls them sanctuaries, she said. Takes in orphans, widows. Starts churches, then he disappears. Always before someone starts asking questions. She pointed at a name halfway down the list. Cassidy Morn, age 10, disappeared in Abilene last spring. Sheriff blamed the father. Father hanged. She looked at Clay then, something dark rising behind her stare. I thought I was the last one, but he's still doing it. Sam was silent. I have to finish it, she said. Clay nodded once, like she'd said something about the weather. He understood. Some men can't be buried until you drag them back into the daylight. Where is he now? Canyon Ridge, south of Cheyenne. Last sighting 6 weeks ago. That's a long ride. She didn't blink. I wasn't asking permission. The boy spoke for the first time. Then I'm coming too. Elia's jaw set hard. No. I'm not a child anymore. You are, and I already lost you once. Clay watched them both, the fire in Elia's eyes. The steel in the boy's voice. He saw what it would cost either way. I'll stay with him, he said. Elia turned sharply. You. He's safe here. I've buried worse than Voss on this land. A long silence, then she nodded, slow. That night, Clay helped her pack. She took only what she needed. A rifle, a revolver, the knife she kept under her sleeve. No letters, no tokens, no sentiment. When she mounted the bay mare at dawn, she looked back only once. Sam stood beside Clay, fists clenched at his sides. Will she make it? He asked. Clay's answer was low, certain, if anyone can. Days passed like vultures circling, slow and ominous. Sam trained with Clay every morning. He was quick, hungry, smarter than his years, but his hands still shook when he fired. Clay taught him how to breathe around the fear, how to reload without looking, how to survive. On the 7th day, a rider appeared on the horizon, not Elia. Clay watched him approach, tension coiling like wire in his shoulders. The man wore a preacher's collar, carried no weapon, smiled like he'd just stepped out of Sunday school. Afternoon, he said. Clay did lower the rifle. State your business. I'm looking for a girl, woman I suppose now, red hair, green eyes, might have gone by Elia Durant or Elia Voss. Clay said nothing. The man tilted his head. She's troubled, delicate, you might say. Took something from me. She's not here. You sure? Clay cocked the rifle. The preacher's smile faltered, but only for a second. Well, he said, mounting up again, if you see her, tell her Gideon says come home. It's time. He rode off into the dusk like a specter out of scripture. Clay waited until the dust settled. Then he turned to Sam. We double the traps, and you sleep with the rifle beside you now. Sam didn't protest. They both knew what was coming. This wasn't just Elia's fight anymore. Canyon Ridge was a slit in the world, carved by water and wind over centuries, hidden beneath the spine of the earth. A church stood at its mouth, whitewashed, humble, silent, too silent. No bells rang, no voices sang, just vultures circling overhead, black against the red cliffs. Elia came at dawn, cloaked and alone. She rode past the empty rail station, past the dust-choked graveyard with stones so knew the names hadn't weathered. She dismounted before the chapel steps and tied the mare without ceremony. A boy stood at the door, maybe 9, barefoot, eyes wide with that dull shine you only see in the half-broken. Elia crouched. "You seen a man named Voss?" she asked. The boy didn't speak. He pointed behind her. She turned slowly. Gideon Voss stood in the doorway of the chapel, his hands folded like prayer, his hair silver in the sun. "Elia," he said, "daughter." Her hand twitched toward the revolver. He smiled, soft and sad. "You always had a streak of fire. That's why I chose you." She drew, the shot cracked through morning air and punched into the wood beside his head. He didn't flinch, just stepped aside and gestured toward the pews. "Come home," he said. "It's all still yours." Inside, the chapel was lined with faces. Girls, boys, women, all silent, watching. "Your kingdom's dead," she said. "No," Voss whispered, stepping down the aisle, "it's just changed shape." She moved like wind over stone, cold, exact. The second shot took his hand. He screamed, staggered, fell against the altar. She kept walking. Behind her, some of the younger ones began to cry. Others backed away. "I'm not here to save them," she said. "I'm here to end you." He bled across the pulpit like a man baptized in the wrong gospel. "You think this ends it?" he rasped. "I know it does." Then she drove the knife under his ribs, angled up. His breath hitched once, then stopped. She stood over him until the light changed. At the ranch, the sky darkened fast, too fast. Clay felt it before he heard it, a pressure in the air. The horses in the paddock cried out, restless. Sam stood near the barn, clutching the rifle like a question. Then came the riders, 6 of them, dust-raised, black coats, eyes like burned-out stars. They didn't speak, they didn't have to. They came for Elia, for vengeance, for legacy. Clay stepped off the porch, shotgun ready. "This is your last warning," he said. The lead rider dismounted. His face was wrapped in cloth, the kind of man who forgets his own name in someone else's cause. "You took our father," he said. "He wasn't a father, he was a monster." The man reached for his gun. Clay shot first. The first fell. The second dove behind the water trough. Sam fired from the barn and caught one through the shoulder. The others returned fire. Wood splintered. The sky cracked open. Clay moved through it like a man who had nothing left to lose. He took 2 more down before the rifle clicked dry. Sam was shouting. He couldn't tell what, then everything went red and sharp and far away. Then silence. When Clay opened his eyes, Sam was beside him, sobbing into his chest, blood on his hands but not his own. 4 bodies lay scattered across the yard. The 5th crawled, dragging a shattered leg. A new horse appeared on the ridge. Elia, she didn't ask what happened. She saw. She dismounted, crossed the yard, and put a bullet in the crawling man without a word. Clay was breathing ragged. The wound in his side looked deep. "I told you I'd keep him safe," he gasped. She nodded. "You did." He smiled once, bloody and proud, then closed his eyes. Clay didn't die, not that night. Elia kept him breathing with whiskey, stitches, and grit. The boy never left his side. When the frost came, the land went quiet. No more riders, no more ghosts, just the 3 of them. She buried Voss's ledger under the floorboards, burned the preacher's coat, painted the church red. By spring, the crops began to grow again. Justice had taken root. Spring brought no fanfare, just meltwater down the gullies and a green haze creeping across the hills, cautious and thin. The land wasn't healed, but it was no longer bleeding, and that, in this place, was enough. Clay limped on a cane now. The wound never quite closed. It stiffened his gait and pulled his spine sideways when he walked too long, but he bore it without complaint. He had nearly died for a boy he'd known less than a year and a woman he still barely understood. It didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like choosing something other than loneliness. The boy was different, too, not hardened exactly, but wary, watchful. His childhood had been brief and sharp-edged, and it would not return. He rose early, knew how to skin game and shoot clean, but he still flinched at thunder and never asked to be alone. And Elia moved like a woman with unfinished business still humming in her bones. She didn't go back east. Didn't ride to find more names or chase down shadows in rail towns or backwater missions. She stayed, not out of surrender, but because the thing inside her had shifted. She'd finished something vital in that canyon, something that bled out through the preacher's mouth and never spoke again. But vengeance didn't vanish. It transformed. She built a ledger of her own, not names to punish, but ones to protect. Girls she'd heard about from whispers in town, orphans working the laundry houses, wives gone missing in mining camps. She didn't call it charity. She didn't call it anything. But sometimes she'd ride out for 3, 4 days and come back with a child in tow or a bruised woman who wouldn't meet Clay's eyes for a week. They stayed in the hayloft, the cellar, the porch swing if they couldn't sleep indoors. No one was turned away. The ranch became a way station for the lost, a quiet sanctuary with barbed wire and buried guns. Once, the sheriff from White Fork came asking questions. A drifter had turned up dead with a bullet in his gut, and no one claiming responsibility. Clay stood on the porch, hand resting on the old shotgun, and said the only thing he needed to. "You want to dig up graves, Sheriff. I suggest you bring more men." The law didn't come back. Sam took to reading. Elia taught him how to write with ink, not just charcoal. Clay caught him copying from a Bible once, not for piety, but to see how language worked. He wanted to write down what had happened, not to be remembered, just to understand it. When summer came, the wheat finally took. The soil still fought back, but the roots held. Clay leaned against the fence one morning, watching the wind bend the stalks, and realized he hadn't dreamed of the fire in months. Elia joined him there. "You ever wonder," she said, "what it might have been like if none of it happened?" He didn't answer for a long while. "No," he said at last, "that's not the world we got." She nodded. They stood there for a while longer, shoulder to shoulder, watching the gold ripple across the earth. Later that year, a man came through claiming to be Voss's brother, wanted to settle old debts. He left before nightfall, minus 2 teeth and the money in his saddlebags. Elia never even spoke to him. Clay handled it. They buried a colt that winter, lost to fever. Sam cried for it. Elia didn't stop him. They built a new bunkhouse the next spring for the ones who had no homes to go back to. Elia marked the rafters with words in another language, Latin maybe. Clay never asked for a translation. Years passed, as they do, slowly, then all at once. The boy became a man under that hard sun, full of scars and grace. He never took a last name, he never left the land. One day he buried Clay beneath a circle of white stones beside the old well and didn't say a word for 3 days. Elia stood with him. She never remarried. She never left. People stopped calling her a mail-order bride. They called her something else. A ghost who took in strays. A widow who spoke 5 languages and could hit a bird in flight. A preacher slayer. A shelter in the Badlands. But to Sam, she was just the woman who kept her promises. The land never softened. The dust still howled. But something had changed. No one rode against the ranch again. Justice had come, dressed in silence, and it stayed.